Hi, I'm DigitalCT editor Rich Sampson,
And I'm DigitalCT Editor-in-Chief Scott Bogren.
and welcome to another edition of Digital Community Transportation Magazine. And this time we're taking a look at what we call rural transit's greatest generation, how rural transit across America got started, some of the origins, both in legislation, organizations, how those developments played out over the late 1960s, early 1970s, and then what it's transitioned to today in terms of the types of systems that have continued operating all the way since then, and how they also set the foundations for new systems that have just started recently. So we kind of take a look at all the different factors from operations to funding to innovations and technology that got us to where rural transit is today. And Scott, you wanted to lead us into some of those values that were behind that?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I think one of the things we were really trying to capture here is some of the core values and spirit and ideals that were there at the beginnings of what today is both rural public transportation and really community transportation. This is not the beginnings of public transit in rural communities. That history goes back a long ways and certainly was not started in the early 1970s. But the rural public transportation network that we see today, the 5311 network, as it were, that really did begin in the early 1970s. It began with a series of communities that sought to provide public transportation to places that either folks had thought were too difficult to serve, or that there weren't any people there, or also that the economics just weren't right. And they proved all those naysayers wrong. John Burkhart, who we really appreciated, contributed a wonderful piece which kind of covers the lead-in to the early 1970s, and John was there at the beginning and certainly covers things through the 1960s and into the early 1970s. I had the real pleasure of interviewing a bunch of folks who started a lot of these systems in the early 1970s and talked to them about in a larger piece what was there, what they were looking to do, and some of the key things that I think you can pull from those articles are: one, they necessarily weren't saying, I'm going to start rural public transportation. They were just trying to serve communities. They were trying to serve a need. Two, I think Dale said this in my interview with him. I thought it was really important. Adopt no fixed positions. That these things are always got to be flexible and nimble enough to serve changing needs because, as we point out in the article, the rural America of 1975 is not the rural America of 2015. There are many, many changes. And so we also created a timeline that kind of takes you through from 1960 to the present. A lot of the key dates, you see astounding growth in federal investment. And we also have some dates where major changes happened, where we added in intercity bus programs, where all these key factors in the growth to what we see today. Rich, tell us, you interviewed two systems that were there at the beginning that have recently celebrated 40th anniversaries. Talk about those for a sec.
Yeah, a lot of these systems that were created or at least helped along by the Section 147 program are all arriving at their 40th year anniversaries this year. One of those is Jaunt, incorporated in Charlottesville, Virginia, and they serve a 6-county area in and around Charlottesville. And they've been kind of on the pioneering edge of a lot of different things from technologies. They had among the first computers dedicated to ride sharing way back in the early 1980s.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Was not common at the time, and kind of all the ways that they have expanded and a perpetual process of engaging with the counties that deliver them local investment to the agencies they coordinate with, and then keeping tabs on the riders' needs. So it's a process that never ends in terms of getting input and figuring out what the future direction is.
Yep.
Another place we looked at was Grays Harbor Transit along the coast of Washington State. They originally started to serve actually the city of Aberdeen, which is not a huge city, but eventually grew to serve the entire county of Grays Harbor County. They're still here 40 years later. They do an extensive van pool program. They work with veterans and also dialysis clinics to kind of get people, especially veterans who are related to a lot of the military posts in the region, across the mountains over into places like Olympia and Tacoma. So we kind of track the progress of both those organizations as just as a couple of examples. Obviously, there are countless others across the country, and we'll have a couple of links to previous stories we've done in DigitalCT and its predecessor, Community Transportation Magazine, on some coverage we've done throughout the years on rural systems that have been going strong for many decades now.
I think one thing you'll see too when you look at these lists is you'll see that a lot of what we do today, a lot of our challenges today, a lot of the markets that we're trying to serve were there at the very beginning, from tribal entities that were a big part of those 147 grants, veterans. You even see some small urban areas that the Section 147 grants were the means to begin service in small cities. So it's really a benchmark. It's not what created all of this, but it's a benchmark in it, and it's a good place to begin the narrative. Mm-hmm. There are two other stories in the edition that we wanted to call your attention to that kind of maybe fall a little bit outside of the basic theme of the edition. One, I do a story on state transportation investment. It's an important story to take a look at. So many states right now are seeking to add to the federal dollars to grow their state coffers when it comes to varying forms of surface transportation. We cover those states. Also, we try to give you an insight into which states can actually spend some of that money on public transportation and which don't, which is also a critical factor moving forward. And Rich, you had another story as well.
Yeah, I did just some basic looking into the trend of mergers and consolidations that seem to be happening a little more frequently, sometimes directed by states. We're just trying to get an initial pulse reading on how things are developing in terms of why systems might merge, if there's any concerns about being pressured to merge. And this is an issue that we're going to take a look at going forward, but we talked with some folks in a couple different states on their experiences, the need to be proactive, and also to define your identity as a system to ensure that if you want your system to be maintained, reaffirming what its purpose is and what its goals are going forward if merger seems like it's something people are beginning to talk about. So This is, again, not the end of this topic for us to explore, but just the beginning. So stay tuned in future editions of DigitalCT, and as well as Fastmail for kind of how this might play out going forward.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a good kind of a bookmark based on the early part of the edition. We're bringing up these values and community involvement and the uniqueness of every community in the service. And then at the end of the magazine, we're talking about these consolidations. And I think it's a good way to kind of see where we're headed, because that's what one of the things we want to talk about, not just looking at the past, but the key is kind of how that impacts where we're headed.
Yeah, and speaking of where we're headed, at least for DigitalCT, our next edition coming out kind of over the middle of the summer will be our annual state edition. And Scott and I were out in Oregon late April, and drove around the state for a week. And we're really looking forward to sharing some of those stories that we encountered over time in Oregon. So that will be next up in terms of this magazine. But for a lot of you, we'll see you down in Tampa, Florida for the Community Transportation Expo, which will be just in a couple of days as we're filming this video. So if you see us out and about at the Expo or at the rodeo, track us down. And any stories or things you want to see coming up, either in DigitalCT or Fastmail, please let us know. We're always open to your ideas. And we hope to see you all down in Tampa for Expo.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for reading DigitalCT Magazine.